Good evening. Welcome to Convention of States Indiana Live. Do you think we have a big problem with our federal government? If you do, stay tuned because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Our broadcast host is Dale Parrish. He's the Convention of States Indiana State Director. Take it away, Dale.
Well, thank you, Marengo Mike. I hope that turned out okay. I did a little practicing ahead of time to be sure and get him in and not get him started again. So I hope that worked out all right for everyone. So, by the way, you'll probably be seeing some more of Marengo Mike. We're working on creating a few more bits for him. So hopefully, if everything turns out, you'll see more and more of him. But like Marengo Mike said, my name's Dale Parrish. I'm the state director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And before we get any further, I want to say Happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans out there. And so thank you for your service. And I hope you've enjoyed this day where your service has been honored to this country. So thank you very much. Thank you. Well, we have a very interesting program for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the 17th Amendment and not only repealing the 17th Amendment, but we're going to be talking about how it came about, some of the things that contributed to it. And I'm going to have two experts on with me this evening. You've seen them before. Paul Phillips, who is our co-state director in charge of the support group here in our organization, and Gary Harbaugh, who is co-state director in charge of operations. Gary's in charge of all the district captains and region captains in our organization. So I'm going to bring those two in very shortly here. We're going to talk about the 17th Amendment. Then, if time permits, I want to give you a quick update on where we stand here in the state. And then I want to talk about the basics of Convention of States. Again, if time permits, and again, if time permits, we'll try to recognize those individuals that are joining us tonight. So, before I go any further, I want to once again issue my warning, as I normally do, and that is in the event that your screen would go blank or freeze up, just be aware that we've probably had a technical problem, which this does happen. And if that does happen, if that occurs, don't wait around for us, because it just takes too long to get everything up and going again, and I don't want you to have to wait that long. If it happens, put us on your calendar for next Monday evening at 7 o'clock, and we'll be back to meet with you at that time. So without further ado, let me bring on Paul and Gary, and we have to I have to give them a notification. They're in the lobby right now, and I have to notify them to come on into the broadcast. Hi, guys. Can you hear me all right?
Hi, Dale. Hi, Paul.
Hi, guys. Hear you just fine.
All right. Good deal. I had to ask that because we were having a little bit of a hearing problem before. I'm going to try and shift around our view here and see if that's a little bit better. I like that better. All right. Okay, guys. Well, hot topic tonight. We wanted to now we've talked about this before. We've had this on a broadcast before, but it's come up again in some of our meetings here in with Convention of States, because we have quite a few people in our group here in Convention of States that are very much in favor of repealing the 17th Amendment. And we'll get into some of those reasons here in our discussion. But anyway, it has come up again, and I thought, well, let's revisit the 17th Amendment, and let's revisit this issue and talk about it again. So, Paul, why don't you lead us off here with a little history about, what led up, what contributed to the 17th Amendment being proposed and ratified?
Sure. So let's go back to the Articles of Confederation, where the Confederation Congress was made up of representatives from each state. Each state could send anywhere between 2 and 7 representatives, and the representatives were chosen by the state legislatures. And no matter how many they sent, it was always one vote, one state, one vote per state. So there was no popular election of any of the representatives in the Federation Congress.
Yeah.
When the Constitution was drafted, it designed a bicameral Congress, so 2 houses, the House of Representatives elected by the people, so by popular vote, and then the Senate, which were the senators were appointed by the state legislatures, just like the Confederation Congress. And
this is a major point, in my opinion, right?
Absolutely.
Senators were appointed by state legislatures, right?
Right. And it was a part of the system of checks and balances where the state legislatures placed a significant check on the Congress. So the House could be driven by popularity and passions and things like that. But the Senate was supposed to be a place that kind of cooled things down, and the states could step in if something that they felt was injurious to them was proposed. And then there became a push for having the senators selected by popular vote. And there were three kind of, I guess I'll call them complaints. One contention was the state legislatures were corrupted, and that senators could buy their seats. Although that's a popular belief, but there wasn't necessarily a lot of evidence for that. A second was deadlock and delay in appointment of senators. Excuse me, there were a number of states who went for significant periods of time unrepresented in the Senate because the legislature couldn't choose a senator. And what made that even tougher, in 1866, the Congress passed a law that required state legislators to have a majority vote, more than 50% vote, for any senator for them to serve. So if somebody got 45 or 47% of the vote in perhaps a 3-way race, that didn't count. They had to settle it to a majority vote. So the federal law itself made that problem a little more prevalent. And then finally, there was populist sentiment that it was in the progressive era, and the states were doing things like applying for an Article 5 convention to propose an amendment to turn the Senate over to popular election. And it was actually a state of Kansas Republican senator, although a progressive Republican, Joseph Bristow, who proposed the 17th Amendment as it is. And once that was enacted in 1913, the Senate was now chosen by popular vote, and it disconnected the Senate from that state check and balance on their activities.
Okay, Gary. So what was happening? The progressive movement was gearing up here, right?
Yeah, let's talk a little more about that. The idea of popular election of senators or having the public have an influence on that goes way back to at least the 1840s, 1850s. Everybody remembers the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln and Douglas were both proposed as possible senators from Illinois, and they did their debates to try to get popular sentiment in favor of them so that they would influence the state election of the legislators to choose one or the other of them to go to the Senate. So that dated even from the around 1850. Then in the late 1880s, early 1900s, the progressive movement in the United States became very powerful. And two of the powerful people in that, one was William Randolph Hearst, another was William Jennings Bryan. William Randolph Hearst was a publisher, and his influence was probably at least as great as that of Facebook and Google today. The guy had enormous influence across our nation, and he utilized fake news and muckraking stories about the supposed corruption in the selection of senators to gear up popular sentiment in favor of the getting a direct election of senators. And so there was this background of populism and the progressive movement that got people thinking we have to do this in order to preserve the integrity of the Senate. And the truth is that most of that was really just a bunch of fake news that was proposed in order to stir people up to do something that was truly unwise.
Okay. All right. Well, of course, the progressive movement started up, and in comes the president at the time, Woodrow Wilson. So President Wilson was actually, what else was going on in addition to the 17th Amendment? There were a couple other things going on, right?
Yeah, 1913 was a banner year for progressives. So the 16th Amendment was proposed and ratified, and that's the amendment which allowed the federal government to impose an income tax. And then the 17th Amendment, which moved the Senate to popular election. And then finally, the Federal Reserve Act was passed, which created control of the banking system and interest rates and things like that.
So this was the act that actually created the Federal Reserve, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the purpose being was to control the banking system? Yes.
That's a bunny trail that you don't want to go down right now because of time constraints.
Okay.
But,
and the Federal Reserve System is a private system. It's not a part of the federal government.
It's not really federal. So just for the Federal Reserve, remember that it's not federal and there aren't any reserves.
Maybe we should devote a broadcast to this, just talking about the Federal Reserve, huh? Federal Reserve Act. And
you could certainly do that.
Okay. All right. Well, so quite a bit was happening at that time. So I know we've talked about a lot of restructuring going on at that time, right?
Yeah. Fundamentally, the 17th Amendment was, I call it the stealth revolution that overthrew the government that was founded by the framers by taking the states out of the picture. It amounted to taking away their voice as a check and balance on what the federal government would do.
Okay. Okay.
And the federal government, grew tremendously following that event.
Okay. Now, I think, Paul, you were had talked about the Affordable Care Act.
That's an excellent example of the impact of the Senate moving to selection by popular vote. So in 2010, the Affordable Care and Patient Protection Act, or Obamacare as it's known, was passed by the House and the Senate. But immediately thereafter, 27 states joined in lawsuits to have the act repealed. So my math, 27 is more than a majority of the states. So more than a majority of the states opposed this legislation, and had the Senate been appointed by the states, those 27 states could have simply told their senators, vote no, and that wouldn't have passed, and they wouldn't have had to go to the courts to try and get it repealed, which, as we know, didn't work out too well. Once we figured out that a penalty could be called a tax and deemed deemed constitutional that way.
Right.
And one other thing we talked about in this respect is the impact of the 17th Amendment on Article 5 itself. Because once the states lost appointment of senators as a check on the federal government, the only thing that's left is Article 5. It's the only means for states to check federal power. So it's become even more important since the 17th Amendment was passed.
Well, I think it's just so important to realize that what the 17th Amendment, just like Gary and you were saying, the restructuring, how that changed the structure of our government and basically took the states out of the equation. So, or the state legislatures out of the equation, and that wasn't the original intent that our founders had put forth in the Constitution. So, I think it's very, very important. Okay, good discussion. Thank you very much. Any last comments, Gary? Anything you wanted to add?
I think I'll leave it at what I've said so far.
I realize we have time constraints here, folks.
Right.
This is something we could go on and talk about, but time does kind of limit what we can do here. So anyway, Gary, Paul, thank you so much for contributing tonight.
Thanks for
that. We will be seeing you again, I'm sure. So have a good one.
You as well.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, let me send Gary and Paul back into the to the lobby here, and I'm going to bring up my well, just a minute. I got an agenda item stuck up there that I need to. There it is. I can delete that. There we go. Okay. All right. Let me get my PowerPoint going up here, and so I want to give you some information as I normally do here in our broadcast, and let me get the PowerPoint showing on the full screen here. There we go. Okay. All right. Let me give you a little information about what's happening in our state. We have resources available to us all in the state. The main resource that we have is our national website, conventionofstates.com. That is, you'll hear us making reference to this website frequently. It's got a wealth of information in it, and also those of us in leadership roles also use it for administering various aspects of our operation. Now, embedded in that national website is our state website page, conventionofstates.com/Indiana. That's a little more, obviously, a more focused look on our state. Social media platforms, we're on Facebook, Convention of States Indiana. As a matter of fact, our broadcast this evening is coming to you through that Facebook page, Convention of States Indiana. Check us out on the Facebook, please. YouTube channel, COS Indiana. This YouTube channel is very much an educational resource for all of us. We have narrated PowerPoint presentations on there, recordings of these broadcasts that we do each week. Also, Paul Phillips, who you just heard, Paul does a podcast called the Free to Be Free podcast, and we include links to all of his podcasts. So whenever he does a new one, we add it to the list on our YouTube channel. So check it out. Like I said, very much an educational resource. We're also on Twitter, hashtag COS Indiana, on Instagram, Convention of States Indiana, LinkedIn, and so we're out there on many social media platforms. So you should be able to find us without any problem. Quickly, a few numbers. In 2018, we went over 30,000 supporters. We set our goal in the state of Indiana. We set our goal for 2019 of 40,000, and we've already exceeded it. So and still climbing. So our growth just has been tremendous here in the state of Indiana and nationally for the entire organization. About 2,900 volunteers. We have about 40 people in leadership positions. So if you have any desire to get more involved in Convention of States, I urge you to check out the leadership positions that we have available. Go to this national website. Here it is again, conventionofstates.com. Click on the menu selection, Take Action, scroll down and take a look at the different volunteer opportunities that we have. If one is of interest to you, open it up, read about it. If you're still interested, go ahead and make application. You're not obligated in any way, but what that does, then your name comes up on a report that I see and a few others, and one of us will be in contact with you to talk to you further about your interest. All right. Well, let's get in now to the basics of Convention of States. We always try to cover the basics of Convention of States. These are the three tenets, the three parts of our movement that are so very important. It's what our movement revolves around. So it's always important to cover the basics. All right, and the three tenets: the problem, the solution, and the plan. Let's quickly look at each one. The problem. Basically, our government's out of control. Not out of control, but lacks the will and the courage to address some major issues that we see in our government. And we've further identified the problem. We've further identified three what we call abuses of our federal government. Number one is our national debt. And as you know, I think we're over 23 trillion now. And very little is being done to address this issue. Our elected officials, again, lack the courage and the will to address our national debt issue. The second abuse has to do with the regulatory crisis. The administrative state, now considered the fourth branch of government. I know the current administration has eliminated a lot of regulations, but much more needs to be done in this area, especially with how these regulations are created. So the administrative state and the regulatory crisis. And the third abuse has to do with state sovereignty. When our country was founded on the concept of dual federalism, where the federal government and the states had equal power, shared power. Well, that is all tilted in favor of the federal government now. Now, we think a good contributing factor to this problem is the career politician. So we want to see term limits for elected officials, Congress, as well as the federal judiciary. All right, so those are the three abuses that define the problem. What's our solution? Well, the solution, we think, is right in Article 5 of our Constitution. Article 5 describes the two methods whereby amendments can be proposed to the Constitution. So let's just briefly look at those two methods, okay? And now we're not making this up, folks. This is literally in Article 5 of our Constitution. The first method is what we're used to seeing. That's where 2/3 of Congress propose an amendment. Then that amendment that proposal then has to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, which would be 38 states. Once ratified, then it becomes an amendment to the Constitution. Well, there is a second method right in Article 5, and that's where 2/3 of the state legislatures apply to hold a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. Any amendments that come out of that convention, any proposed amendments, then have to go through the same ratification process as with the first method. In other words, 3/4 or 38 states, state legislatures would have to ratify any proposed amendment or amendments that would come out of the convention. This is what we want to see happen. We want to see a convention of states happen to address those three abuses that we talked about in the problem area. Okay, well, what's our plan to bring this about? Well, our plan is in two parts. The first part is the application, or also called the resolution, that we would need 34 states to file, has been designed by Convention of States. And it contains three areas in the subject matter of the application: fiscal restraints, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits. Those are the three areas in our application. That's called the subject matter, and that's what drives the agenda of the convention, is the subject matter of the application. So we want 34 states to utilize our resolution that we've designed for calling for a convention of states. The second part of the plan is mobilizing the grassroots. And that's, when we say grassroots, I'm talking about you and me and our state legislators. That's very important, our state legislators. So we, as you can see, the supporters in the state of Indiana, we are growing, and momentum is growing. We're over 4 million supporters nationwide. We have 15 states that have signed on and using our application. We got to get to 34. So the momentum is growing, and we have good prospects on the horizon. So please, if you're interested at all in joining us, we would love to have you as part of our movement here in Convention of States of Indiana. Okay, let me go back to our broadcast, and you can see me. So let me see myself up there. I hope I don't see myself, but I'm hoping that you see me. All right. Let me recognize some people that have joined us this evening. I see Bill Patton. Bill, thank you for joining us. I see also Jerry Rowe. Jerry Rowe is one of the members of our group here in Indiana. So Jerry, once again, thank you for joining us. Now, before we wrap things up this evening, I want to tell you that our next broadcast will be a week from this evening, Monday evening, November the 18th. And we're going to have another chapter, another episode in our constitutional literacy program. Debbie Stewart, Convention of States volunteer that's doing this program for us, constitutional literacy. She's going to be coming in for another episode. She's going to be talking about Article 1, Section 1, which is our legislative branch. So constitutional literacy next Monday evening on November 18th. Now, just for your information, we will be not broadcasting over the Thanksgiving week. So we're going to take a little break. November the 18th will be the last one for this month. We'll come back on December 2nd. But after the 18th, we will be off. Like I said, we will not be broadcasting during the Thanksgiving week. All right. Well, let's get things wrapped up here as we normally do. One of my favorite things that I like to talk about is a quote from one of our co-founders, Mr. Mark Meckler, and that is that he says that there's a major question facing our country today, and that question is not what should we do, the question is who will decide. So the question facing us is a two-word question, very simply, who decides? And of course, we think in Convention of States, we think we, the people, should have a greater say in deciding issues in our federal government, in our country. Okay, folks, I hope you can see me. I can't see me again on my screen, but I'm hoping you're able to see me, and hopefully you can hear me. But I want to once again say Happy Veterans Day to all of our veterans, and I want to thank you for joining in on our broadcast this evening. We've got some great topics lined up for future broadcasts, so this is a good way for you to stay tuned in on what's happening in Convention of States here in Indiana. So with that, I'll say good night, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Good night.